First of all, welcome to this webinar. For those who are watching and for the purpose of the recording and the fact that this will be going online afterwards, my name is Hannah David and I'm one of the directors of Planning Futures. I'd like to welcome our panelists and to everyone who is watching this webinar to the next breakfast event in our series. This one's entitled, What's the Plan? Local Plans and COVID-19. Just a brief outline of how this virtual event will run. Shortly, I will give a brief introduction to the topic we'll be discussing today. And then I will give an introduction to each of our panelists in turn, who will speak for around 5 to 7 minutes on the topic. We'll then move over to a Q&A part, to the Q&A part of this session. Can I ask anyone who is watching and would like to participate that if you have a question, you submit it through the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen, and not by raising hands. So questions, please, by Q&A. As I mentioned at the beginning of this session is being recorded and will be uploaded onto YouTube and other social media platforms following this session. So to begin, what's the plan, local plans and COVID-19? We wanted to take a step back today and look at the issue of local plans in the rapidly changing context brought about by the COVID-19 crisis. As it stands, of course, we don't know where the crisis is going to lead us and what precisely the long-term consequences will be. However, there is good reason to suspect that the way we live and work will change, and indeed where we live and work might change. This is bound to change the assumptions and projections on which many local plans have been created. In terms of this event, I do not want to get bogged down in the hypotheticals or speculate about the precise nature and scope of the demographic changes that we'll see. Rather, I would like to get a sense from our expert panel of how local plans can, in principle, be shaped or indeed reshaped as the short-term, medium and long-term consequences of the pandemic crystallise. Since this event was advertised, we've also seen the publication of the government white paper on proposed changes to the planning system. As local plans are to remain an important part of these fresh proposals, I think the issues we're discussing today are likely to be of lasting consequence. We have an excellent panel today who are well equipped to discuss how we should approach local plans in a context in which both the real world and the policy world are in rapid flux. So the first speaker on our panel is Killian Garvey. Welcome, Killian. Killian is a specialist planning barrister who acts for developers, local authorities, and the Secretary of State across England and Wales. Killian has been consistently ranked as one of the top 5 juniors under the age of 35 in Planning Resource magazine. For 2 years consecutively, he's been ranked as the 13th best junior barrister nationally. In Chambers and Partners, he is described as scarily bright and just so good on the detail. Over to you, Killian.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and good morning to everyone who's joining us today. So in respect to local plans and how COVID-19 might influence local planning going forward, I'm going to make 2 points, and I'm just going to talk about practical realities of how local plans might be affected by COVID-19. And the first practical point I'm going to talk about is the limited scope, perhaps for right now, for how local planning authorities might want to limit the extent to which COVID-19 might affect their approach to local plans. And the reason I say that is because any local planning authority who are into the process of adopting a local plan, whether they've submitted it or whether they're at an advanced stage of consultation, or they might even be at a stage where they've submitted it for examination and they're waiting for their the hearing dates for examination to proceed. Those local authorities are very unlikely to want to make radical changes to their local plans to account for COVID-19. I know we're going to hear later from Ciara about Brent Council, but a natural position of a local planning authority is if you are at examination, for example, you wouldn't want to go back to the drawing board to radically change up your local plan, because inevitably you will be sacrificing all the work that you have done to that date to get yourself to examination. And that's particularly in the context that the government haven't introduced national guidance that would warrant any change in local plans. Now, whilst I've seen inspectors' decisions that comment about the greater emphasis for proper open space, which was exposed through COVID-19. We've obviously seen changes in permitted development rights in respect to what can happen with city centres and the new Class E, which is going to be introduced through permitted development rights and the use classes order in September, which are going to allow for a greater extent to change offices to residential. And indeed, we've seen inspectors' decisions which might comment about viability and economic impacts related to COVID-19. But we've seen nothing concrete that would suggest that a local planning authority that were going to examination prior to COVID-19, that there is anything in national policy which would dictate that they've got to make huge adjustments to their approach. So in the short to medium term, those local authorities who are already at examination, I can't imagine many of them are going to want to make significant changes to their local plans to reflect COVID-19. And indeed, I imagine we'll hear from Ciara to see what Brent Council's experience has been with COVID-19, to what extent that's factored into their reasoning. So that's the local authorities who are at a relatively advanced stage of the local plan process. Those local authorities who are not at an advanced stage, and they might just be conceiving of their local plan right now, I also imagine that there's going to be limited scope to that they are going to want to consider COVID-19. And the reason I say that is because if you're a local planning authority right now who are considering, should we be getting our local plan adopted, and trying to moot what ideas should inform that process, I imagine, given the publication of the white paper, many of those local authorities are going to think, hold on, don't we need to see what's going to happen with the white paper before we steamroll into trying to adopt a local plan? Because the white paper, we don't know when it's going to be adopted. I know we're going through a 12-week consultation process. We'll then presumably see more detail. And the intention is that this is going to involve primary legislation. So it's going to have to go through Parliament. So we're still talking about a process which might take 12 months or even longer before we see the actual fruits of the white paper being actually adopted into law. But I still imagine lots of local authorities will be trying to consider, well, what will local plans look like in the context of this potentially radical shift in planning law that's being proposed through the white paper, which might mean that they're having pause for thought, and their focus would more be on what are the implications of the white paper than potentially on how COVID-19, again, in the context that national policy isn't telling them necessarily to do anything differently than they would have done pre-COVID-19. So that's the first practical point, which is just the limited scope to which local planning authorities will want to make changes because of COVID-19. The second practical point is about how COVID-19 has affected local plan examinations is the fact that now local plan examinations that are currently being conducted are being conducted virtually, which I'd say has a big impact upon how local plan examinations are actually conducted. In terms of PINS, so PINS started doing some virtual testing in May. They said that seemed to have worked, so they did what they called 35 virtual events in June. And subsequently, they have been rolling out more and more virtual events, and they've extended that to doing local plan examinations. I know recently that they did the South Oxfordshire local plan examination, which was a virtual event. And indeed, I know, at least from my own experience, that still when I'm seeing events go into my diary up till December, I'm still seeing that they are all being booked provisionally as virtual events. So seemingly there's no end in sight, at least for this year, for PINs reverting to meeting in person. Others might have had different experiences, but that's certainly my experience. So how does a local plan examination being virtual actually impact upon it? And the common experience I'm being told about by those barristers and participants in those local plan examinations is that there is a more limited opportunity to actually forensically scrutinize what is actually in the plan. Now, a common criticism with local planning examinations is that inspectors are increasingly trying to just rubber stamp what has been done. And unless there are significant issues, fundamental issues with the local plan, such as garden villages or duty to cooperate, or something in respect to the environmental regulations, a lot of times, more of the issues in respect to viability, open space, a lot of times those issues are going to go through. And the experience I've heard is that is even more the case now, where the limitations of virtual hearings make it even more difficult for members of the public and objectors to a local plan to actually try and get their plans through, to get their points through, and to make forensic points on what would be the more minor issues. I say more minor because they're not going to result in the plan being found unsound, but they are still issues which you would ask an inspector to grapple with. And indeed, I've heard of local objectors, indeed represented by members of my own chambers, who said that they've had a great difficulty just trying to make their points because of the limitations of the technology. So I say that is another issue which is trying to incorporate any argument about COVID-19 at the moment is a difficult one to do. And of course, the big point is, again, you can't point to something in national policy which would demand an inspector who is doing an examination to change their tack if the local planning authority don't want to. So I say from a practical point of view, there are still obstacles with trying to make changes to local plans in the short and medium term. And then in terms of the long term, well, I imagine it will be really what is said in the white paper, which might dictate what happens with local plans going forward and how they may react to COVID-19. So that they're my practical issues with currently trying to incorporate COVID-19 into local plans. I think I'll pass that back to you then, Hannah.
Thank you very much. Some very interesting issues, particularly on the practicalities. We do have a question on that, which I'll kind of give to you after we've heard from the other speakers. But you've raised some very important points in relation to actually plans being outdated almost because of the changes in legislation and also because of the crisis itself. So we'll revisit that point after we've heard from the other speakers. And our next speaker is Anna Rose from the Planning Advisory Service. So Anna holds a first degree and master's in town and country planning and has been an RTPI member since 2003. She started her planning career advising NFU members on planning, transport and environmental law before moving to Rugby Borough Council to bring forward the local development framework. Anna became head of planning and culture at Rugby in 2007, taking on responsibility for economic development, sports and arts, as well as planning. Anna led the planning team through the first successful systems thinking review of the planning service and became well known for driving economic growth through planning. In November 2014, Anna moved to Milton Keynes Council as the Director of Growth, Economy and Culture. Alongside an ambitious programme of service improvement, Anna took a lead role in producing the next 50-year spatial vision for the area. Anna is currently the head of the Planning Advisory Service. delivering improvement in planning services across the country. She had a focus on working collaboratively and creating the environment for things to happen. Anna is a past president of the Planning Officers Society, a trustee of the TCPA, and a non-executive director of public practice. She is an active peer reviewer for the LGA and a regular speaker on strategic planning issues, growth-focused planning, and improving the customer experience. Over to you, Anna.
Okay, whereas Killian has gone practical, I've gone very theoretical and a bit philosophical, because I tread a very fine line behind, I suppose, being able to give my own opinion and being employed by the government, essentially. So when I was looking at this, I thought, well, COVID's been so different, hasn't it, for all of us? It all depends on your personal circumstances. So I think I'm very lucky. I live in a Northamptonshire village. I have a house and a garden, and I share my house with my family. However, when I was looking at this, I thought, for my sister, who only lives 2 miles up the road, she found COVID really, really difficult. And the reason she found it difficult is because she doesn't drive and she lives on her own. And that was a very different experience to her. We're from the same demographic, same, I suppose, wealth, same sort of health circumstances, and yet very different experiences. So as planners, when we're looking to address issues of a pandemic, I suppose what we have to understand is that the situation with the pandemic is very different for people dependent on their own circumstances. And therefore, we're not trying to solve one issue, or are we? So when I looked at that, I thought, is there something that is common to everybody going through the COVID pandemic that planners have a role in addressing? And the one issue that I thought planners have a really important role in is creating space. I think for me in COVID, what I have realised is that the inequality in space available to individuals is something that has categorised people's experience of going through it. And when we talk about space, we tend to, I think, in this country, think primarily about our own personal space. So the space within our living accommodation, the space to house our car, the space to hang our washing in the garden. You know, it's our space, belongs to me. Whereas I suppose as planners, I think we have a greater role in that shared space. And it's about the roles we put space to, how we use the space. Is it safe and accessible? And is it for everybody, or is it just for those who can choose to use it? And I asked myself a few questions from my experience in local government. I thought, well, actually, if I was to go back and start a revolution of planning, I probably would start foolishly around parking, and start to challenge the premise that more land is given over to parking, carports and garages on our developments than is ever given over to shared usable space for communities. And I came to the conclusion that the public spaces need to be bigger, and probably we all need to think about sacrifice in terms of our own private space in order to enable that to happen. But then again, how would local plans then be able to meet their housing numbers if we had so much space given over to the common good? How would you get all the houses? Would people buy them? Well, I think, and I've thought for a very long time, pre-COVID, that actually local plans need to allocate far more land rather than less. At the moment, we have a situation where we limit our land allocation based on our housing numbers. And what we do is we look at housing numbers as a determinant of the space requirement. And quite often the space around it is marginal and discretionary. And so I would say that there is a need for the whole planning system to think about the space that is required around communities, both in terms of business communities and residential communities. And that requires a shift in culture that determines that we should all be looking at more, not less space, but not just to increase the housing numbers. And I think that's going to take a real step change in attitude if we were to do that. And especially because plans have struggled at examination to prove a need for more land because of their housing numbers. And I think the ability to over allocate in the current system is critical to being able to address some of the needs that are arising through COVID. But it's not just about housing. So the new Class E renders much of the town centre employment and leisure policies of a local plan redundant. You know, local plans are going to be different just as on the basis of that change alone. And without control over the use of the buildings, I think councils are going to need to consider how those areas work and make them resilient for the flexibility that Class E allows. And this is far more likely to focus on design codes, wider master planning, and will require a collegiate and collaborative approach, because it won't have the same powers that the old use class allowed councils in terms of their local plans to govern their own centres. There'll also be a need to consider how work from home functions for those that don't have the space to work from home. I think there's been a great drive for us all to work from home, and sitting here in a privileged position, yes, I am in my bedroom, but at least I have a bedroom that I can put a desk in. There's a lot of people where work from home just won't work for them. And so I can see that we're going to have a growing trend for shared workspaces on developments and estates. So where people can go and work from their home base, but not necessarily their home. And I think that that's going to be a requirement really of a new way of working. If we're moving away from offices and physical company representation, then we're going to have to find ways of everybody having the space to work in the new way. And then I thought, well, actually, it's not just in terms of our individual needs. There is also the wider public sector to think about. The one big problem that we all know, anybody who's got children at the moment will know that September's looming, and the issue of whether our children are safe to go back to school. And again, the issue seems to come down to the space available to enable them to do that safely. So I think planners are going to have to work with their colleagues across the public sector to say, do we need to do better, bigger public estates so that you can more safely move around, or are there different ways of delivering the public estate? Because there has been a trend for obviously density, higher numbers in smaller spaces, and it goes against the curve of what we're seeing now in a pandemic. And public buildings, and this goes for all of them, hospitals, everything, will have to be considered in the light of what happens if this continues, or if it happens again. When I was looking through this as well, I thought there is an opportunity here in local plans and for councils to consider whether are we actually going to try and level up? Is this what, as a country, we are going to try and do? You know, equality rests in all elements of the planning system. And yes, it is the size of your accommodation, yet it's also the security of your tenure, the nature of your employment, your family situation, your access to transport, health, well-being, background, language, identity, ethnicity. Everything's involved in whether we have an equal and just society. And I think the location of development often predetermines who can live there, and especially outside of cities. So I come from working in planning outside of London and outside of cities really, and location determines if you can live there or not. And when considering areas for development, councils need to lead a discussion in how the development works for every member of their community, rather than those who can choose to live there. And designing new development around the less advantaged would help to change the traditional approaches to site design, I think, and encourage better behaviours. And if we can't handle equality, I often make this point, but then can we call it climate? Because actually, a lot of the outcomes that we're seeking in terms of equality work for the climate as well. And some of the biggest issues that have become glaringly obvious through the pandemic are inequality and the impact of us not acting as normal on the climate. And they share a lot of the same necessary outcomes. They share commonality in design, location, and long-term impact. And so I think that councils have a role in bringing inequality and climate measures together to try and make better spaces. So summing up, I think the issues that COVID has highlighted are not all new, and they're certainly not all temporary. And just as a lot of us would like to keep a lot of the procedural elements of the government's changes that have been made, I think we should also remain focused on the longer term issues that have been highlighted through this pandemic that affect the way that everybody prospers. And I think councils have a real role in that.
Thank you very much. And of course, you've raised several issues there, particularly the role of local councils, which are obviously fundamental in the production of local plans, but also in planning their own spaces in their own areas. And of course, each local council will have their own perspective on what's appropriate for their area, and each area will have a different function. We're seeing obviously people almost escaping from cities, and as you say, much more working from home, and it's becoming much more common to see people working at least 3 days at home, and possibly coming into the office for the remaining 2 days, or finding other ways of working. So that's going to change those places from where we start to where we end during a working week, certainly. If we could move over to our final speaker today, Ciara Whelehan. Ciara has 19 years experience in the public and private sector, focusing on all aspects of development plan making. She is Brent's spatial planning manager, responsible for all aspects of plan making, place making, infrastructure planning, and strategic transport. Prior to joining Brent, she worked at the London Borough of Redbridge, where she successfully led her team through the local plan examination and delivered a sound local plan. Whilst at Redbridge, Ciara was also interim head of planning and building control, where she led on implementing some of the recommendations of the LGA Peer Challenge Review on delivering service improvements. Ciara has previously worked at Haringey, Greenwich and West Lothian councils. She holds a degree in geography from University College Dublin and a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh. Over to you, Ciara.
Thank you, Hannah, and good morning, everyone. Following on from Killian and Anna, I thought it would be, very useful to kind of provide an insight into what's happening in Brent at the moment, particularly our local plan, the stage that we're at, looking at some of the challenges that we're facing, and give some potential kind of thoughts and ways in which we can adapt the plan in response to COVID, but obviously bearing in mind kind of points that Killian raised in terms of limited scope in terms of the stage that we are at. But just a bit of background, the local plan has been in production since 2017, and it is supported by a raft of technical evidence base and studies, which have been considered and agreed over time with members and various stakeholders. The plan itself, very ambitious strategy, setting out growth and how the borough will change up to 2041. We have a minimum housing target of 23,200 homes over the next 10 years. And alongside that, of course, we're actually provide capacity borough from the London plan. So very much committed to increasing industrial floor space, supporting growth in businesses and employment. The plan does have very strong policies on promoting town centres, particularly recognising the important role that they play in supporting economic vitality and the diverse communities in Brent that they serve. And then this is all kind of wrapped up in terms of securing, strong community infrastructure to bring about regeneration that is inclusive and it benefits both existing and new communities. So I suppose in terms of in Brent, we're in a very good position insofar that the plan itself is recognised as a very key important document by the council, and there is strong support, and we're very lucky from our cabinet members, and a real impetus to get it through the system, to get it adopted, so that we can continue to deliver our ambitious regeneration and growth agenda. I think that's really great, and bearing that in mind then, and the real kind of the drive for us to get an adopted plan in place as quickly as possible, we submitted our local plan on the 17th of March, a week before lockdown, So, you know, a significant milestone in the plan making journey, as you know, and we're obviously very pleased to and relieved to have it in the system. But at that point, there was, you know, huge uncertainty as to, you know, what was going to happen next, any guidance from PINS on how, you know, sessions and hearing sessions in particular would be conducted. But I'm also very pleased to say that, you know, it didn't take us the 7 years to get to that stage, which has been quoted in the press around the slowness around plan making. So, you know, from 2017 to now, you know, excellent progress, I think. And I suppose then following submission, it was about 6 weeks, I think, and right in the height of lockdown, that we were asked by members actually whether we would have to kind of assess some of the evidence in the plan, particularly transport implications. And I think that was because of the immediate impact COVID was having on transport, you know, the need to change streets, as Anna says, the emphasis around spaces, you know, change streets, enable safer social distancing, and also, you know, to facilitate more cycling and walking infrastructure. And our immediate response to that was, well, no, you know, we're at the stage that we're at. There is very much limited scope to be kind of reviewing evidence base and looking at transport or even indeed housing need and employment. You know, we think, you know, because the plan is flexible enough, and that's the whole thing of plan making, that your plans are flexible to be able to respond to short-term changes without having a whole-scale review of your evidence base. And, you know, we're at such an advanced stage now, as Killian referred to, you know, pausing the programme now to revisit evidence base really wasn't something that we wanted to do in terms of time, the resources, you know, that are associated with that. And it really was a case of, you know, let's continue and, you know, and anticipate an early question from the inspectors, you know, along the lines of the implications of COVID on the plan. And, you know, assuming that that would be the case, that they would ask us that. However, in their issues and matters that they published in July, towards the end of July, we were very, very surprised that they didn't actually include a specific question on the impact of COVID and whether we need to look at evidence base, did we need to refresh any elements of it, you know, particularly housing need, employment and transport priorities. So, you know, that was a real surprise actually, and that they didn't, you know, at least flag that up then. And I think that goes back to Killian's point that there wasn't actually, you know, guidance issued from PINS or nationally about the impact on the plan making process. However, since then, of course, we've seen the changes to the use classes order, and which they will come into effect on the 1st of September. And the inspectors have now asked us to consider the potential implications of these amendments, particularly on a number of our town centre and economy policies, as well as our site allocations, and actually to anticipate further discussion on this issue during the hearing sessions, which have now been scheduled for the end of September, and they are fully virtual events. And so I suppose, you know, bearing all that in mind, and given, you know, the Brent experience to date, I suppose really it's thinking about, you know, those short, medium and long-term changes and how you could actually adapt your plans. And I think for us at Brent, the kind of immediate short-term change is responding to changes to the use classes order and the introduction of the new E-class, you know, which, you know, was possibly introduced to address the impact of COVID, you know, to kickstart the economy, town centres. And, you know, we will be seriously considering those policies, putting forward amendments to town centre and economic development policies as a result. That's the kind of immediate response, I would say, to the changes. I think, as we also mentioned earlier, other immediate policy changes that kind of spring to mind really are amenity space, outdoor space, communal, private, public space. And I think we really need to be thinking about more radical changes to the public space. First of all, to enable, you know, safer social distancing, but all the other benefits that, you know, that actually brings. And I actually don't think, you know, amending amenity policies and spaces would require massive changes to evidence base. And I think if you've got some strong policy hooks in local plans, you've probably the potential to address them in, you know, an update to an existing SPD on design or amenity or even, you know, produce a new one, and they don't actually take that long, you know, compared to local plans to get through. And I think, you know, we have seen, you know, the kind of emphasis on the importance of space in recent appeal decisions. And there was a scheme in South London recently where the inspector particularly referenced the importance of good quality private outdoor amenity space and highlighted, you know, the restrictions imposed by the pandemic. So I think, you know, in terms of, you know, real immediate change, I think amenity space and communal spaces and outdoor space are really key. And, you know, we're actually receiving some questions from our planning committee members, you know, more so than via the plan making side, but it's the impact of planning decisions. Okay, have you thought about COVID? So I think there's the decision side of things needs to be looked at as well. And I think that decision and more of them will really act as a useful precedent. And I suppose in the more medium kind of to longer term then, of course, there will be significant changes to housing need and employment, especially in the office space. And as Anna mentioned, you know, more working from home. And I think we're actually going to see, you know, our town centres and our local town centres thrive actually in our neighbourhoods. And I think that side of things and the evidence base there will certainly need to be updated accordingly with new assumptions. But, you know, that's not just in response to the immediate impact of COVID, but this is also taking account of local plans and the white paper reforms and where local authorities sit in their kind of plan making journey. And, you know, we're in a recession at the moment. You know, normal cycles are disrupted anyway, so we really don't know what's happening in terms of the housing market and shift out of London or bigger cities. And, you know, do we have more vacant homes as a result? So I suppose to kind of sum up, I think really it is about, for local authorities, it's about taking stock and considering the stage that you're at in your plan making journey. You know, if you're at early stages, old issues and options, or an early Reg 19, yeah, you can think about, you know, looking at new evidence base and maybe look at individual scenarios and potential impacts of COVID. But then if you're more advanced, you know, like us in Brent, we've submitted, we're under examination. It really is hopefully a case of, you know, keep going. You know, you really don't want to have to revisit raft of evidence base and get the plan adopted, I think, as soon as you can. And then maybe it's a case of considering an early review of that plan, or perhaps a partial review, you know, picking up on the bigger issues like housing and employment. And then, of course, there is, you know, alongside all of this is the requirement for us to have plans in place by 2024, as this coming out of the white paper. So, you know, it's all of these things kind of all playing together. And I suppose finally, it's just the whole point of monitoring. And I think now it's more important than ever in terms of plan making to closely monitor our impact, the impacts of COVID in, you know, short, medium, long term, but also the policy performance, and really not underestimate the important role that monitoring will play in all of this, which will then kind of feed into your plan making timescales and, you know, whether you do want to do a partial or full review later down the line. So I shall leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've had 3 different perspectives, but actually there's one question that applies to everything that, well, applies to points that each of you have actually made from your own perspective. Killian, you mentioned that there's no national guidance that would warrant changes to local plans. And Anna, you talked quite a lot about the importance of space and recognising the need for more space and the lessons that we should learn from COVID. And of course, Anna, you also talked about the same thing, and that local authorities need to take stock and need to look at their own locations and see what's appropriate in terms of following through with the local plan, which you say once it's in, you should carry on through the process. It shouldn't be withdrawn in an intermediate stage. But so my question to you all is, do you envisage situations where local plans that have already gone through in the last few years may actually become unfit for purpose if there are dramatic changes in demographics or a focus for more space, as Anna's referred to, and of course to the white paper, the changes that are suggested in the white paper? And do you think local authorities should and will willingly revise plans early to take this into account? So Killian, would you like to start with that one?
At the moment, I think the answer would be no. And I say that because the way that the current approach to housing numbers is that, I mean, these are all things that are subject to change, but the way that the current approach is in light of the National Planning Policy Framework is that where you have a local plan adopted, whatever the housing requirement is identified within the local plan, that is the housing requirement for a period of 5 years. And after 5 years, unless there is a review, you then move to the standard method, whatever is directed by the standard method. Now, the reason why that's relevant is that if there is a sudden shift in housing numbers, that would lead to a local planning authority seeing whatever the standard method produces in that local authority changing, let's say in 2 years' time. Well, local planning authority aren't required necessarily, unless there is a review mechanism built into their local plan, they're not necessarily required to do anything. They can just say, well, our plan is within 5 years of being adopted. Therefore, what we decided at the point of adoption, that is our requirement. And of course, a developer can come along and say, but your standard method has radically changed. But as the way national policy currently works, the local planning authority can simply say, well, we're not required to have regard for that because our plan is within 5 years of adoption. So in a local planning authority who are adopting their plan now, they have that grace period of 5 years. Now, of course, the government might change that in the fullness of time, but as it stands, until that 5-year period expires, they don't need to really have regard for what the standard method is saying, unless there is some sort of review mechanism built into the local plan.
Anna, any thoughts?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that it's going to be hard to force the hand of a local authority who's sitting on a sound plan before they're ready. What I would say, though, is the 5-year review period is not really that, because in order to review it 5 years, you'll probably be doing that at 3. So the turnaround time on a plan is quite short anyway. So in order to make some of these changes, you're not going to be waiting that long before you're going to need to review anyway and reassess. And I think Ciara made a really good point about monitoring. Back in the day, monitoring was really, really important in plan making. And we used to monitor all the policies on a yearly basis and feed back to whatever higher body. And I think we're getting to a point where we really need to install some of that discipline again, so that we know that what we're putting in place is actually delivering what we intended. I think at the moment, there are a lot of plans that have policies that are either not used or not used as intended, or are not delivering what they were meant to. And in order for plans of the future to actually serve the purpose they're meant to, then monitoring and evaluation is going to be even more critical, I think.
Yes, it also sounds very sensible.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Anna and Killian. And, fingers crossed, we have a Brent sound local plan early next year. We'll have our 5 years review period. And absolutely, I think really after 2 years of adopting your plan, you will then start considering a review. Because, particularly in London, you've got the London plan coming through. So what's going to happen there? So you'll have to take account of all of that, changes to, national level. So really, you've got your 5-year grace period, but realistically, you are talking from 5 years of adoption. Within those first 2 to 3 years, you are thinking about a review of your plan. And just reiterate the point about monitoring as well. It's more and more important. And I think, we still produce our annual monitoring reports, but there, as Anna was saying, the discipline isn't there as kind of was it used to be. And I think really the focus has to be on that, particularly now. It's so much change is happening all at once. With COVID, the white paper, youth council, everything is changing. So I think really to be able to understand that and the impacts that they have in short, medium, long term, you could just kind of underestimate the importance of monitoring there.
Thank you. I think we all agree that that's a very important point, and hopefully that's an important takeaway from this session. Just moving over to questions that have come in. Have a question from Andrew Taylor from Countryside. Anna spoke about good planning. has COVID just brought about the realization that we should be upholding established standards rather than reinventing things completely? Anna?
Yeah, I think there's some sense in that. I think a lot of what I was saying about what we should be doing can be done already. There are a few stumbling blocks in terms of housing numbers and allocations, but good planning can always operate in any planning system, I would say. It just takes the will to do it. COVID has highlighted what we all knew was happening already. We all knew that there were vast inequalities in terms of people's living standards. We also knew that what we are currently doing has a huge impact on the climate. But I think what COVID has allowed us to do is to see that in stark reality, whilst we're all sat at home watching our television screens and we're being shown the appalling situation that some people are in, and some of the air quality in particular results from around the country when we're not all moving around so much. I think that it allows us it's allowed us a little bit of a pause. And I think it would be a great shame if we didn't take the opportunity to try and reflect some of that thinking we've done over lockdown into the planning that we do into the future.
Killian?
Yeah, I completely agree with Anna. And I've seen what that difference in emphasis. I've seen inspectors' decisions where they are refusing against existing policies in respect to open space, but they're simply affording that more weight. And the reason why they afford, a deficient in open space more weight is because they've said, well, COVID-19 has demonstrated that greater need for open space that's adequate. So yeah, I think it's just been a shift, as Andrew's question suggests, a shift in emphasis rather than necessarily a shift in policy.
Ciara?
Yeah, well, I'd just like to add to that actually, that just in terms of what we have been doing in Brent, as quite separate to the local plan, but in terms of our immediate response, picking up the issues around inequality and then the drive to deliver healthy communities and the climate change agenda. We published a transport recovery plan, it's kind of towards the end of May, and that's all about outlining our approach for delivering improvements to the transport system, in response to the challenges raised by the pandemic, but also more kind of longer term, looking at ways in which we can deliver kind of the climate change and the healthy community agenda. So, there we're really trying to look at delivering a range of infrastructure improvements in the short, medium term that principally are for pedestrians and cyclists, to look at reducing the spread of the virus, but also more longer term, looking at road safety, tackling climate change emergency, to really ensure a more healthier, inclusive and sustainable future for Brent's residents. And I think the other point really about just inequality is that we recently, at the start of this week, Brent published an independent poverty commission report, and that did reveal the stark inequalities as a result of COVID. And there's a number of recommendations within that now that we will be taking action on, and a lot around kind of town centres and regeneration, but also around looking at housing and in terms of the overcrowded, the poor conditions residents are living in, and trying to kind of look at ways in which we can address that through planning and through regeneration. And this is a case of bringing forward in our town centres more residential use and shrinking the core of retail, but expanding that out to other uses. So I think there's so many things at play here, and so it's not just the immediate kind of how local plans can do it, but there's other measures across the council, and as you mentioned earlier, a coordinated approach with stakeholders and partners to deliver holistically these changes rather than just pure policies. The emphasis is cross-cutting.
Thank you. Did the panel think that responding the responses to COVID through the local plans will, and I appreciate Ciara that you're some way down the line, but just in the whole, so do the panel think that the responses to COVID will be eclipsed by responding to the white paper and the implication of those changes? So I guess that part of that question is, what do we think about the timing of the white paper now when we're trying to deal with issues raised by COVID at the moment too? So Anna, would you like to start on that?
Yeah, I think there's a great danger that all of the thinking on COVID will be swept aside to concentrate on growth, renew, protect. I think the timing of the white paper is really as expected. We were expecting a white paper, and as soon as lockdown closed, by the government, then the white paper came out. So I think the timing is just, I suppose, what I expected. I think the problem for local councils is that whereas they might have started those really good discussions about COVID and the issues that we've been discussing here, they will soon be looking and worrying about what happens next in terms of their overall plans. And I think for councils as well, it's not just the actual planning, it's that the plans come with a really huge cost, and there are resource implications. And I think, Ciara, I've been a plan manager, and actually the thought of having to do it all again and completely differently when you've just done it is a budgetary nightmare, actually. And I think that will occupy a lot of councils at the moment, is how on earth are we going to have the resources and the capacity to do everything that's in the white paper, as well as carrying on with what we're doing until things are decided.
Yes, and that's a point that's actually been raised in another question about, and Ciara, perhaps you can sort of give us your experience on this, about the resourcing and lack perhaps of experienced planning officers in this particular area with dealing with this particular sort of crisis, and how LPAs are able to respond to this crisis.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's what was mentioned earlier, the whole issue around evidence base. We started the plan in 2017 with, huge amount of evidence base that's been commissioned and the costs associated with that. So, the appetite to go back and to review that now, it's just, it's pretty painful thinking about it, that you would have to go and start fresh. So that's why I really think that we should be probably a bit more kind of a bit cleverer around our evidence base in the first place, and maybe commission stuff that's proportionate to the issues that you really want to include in your plan. So, at the stage that we're at in Brent now, we're fortunate that we submitted when we did, and fingers crossed we're very close to securing our adopted plan next year. But then it's thinking of what happens next, because as soon as that hopefully is through, we will need to be thinking about the implications of the white paper. What do we do? Do we kind of hold on to some of the policies? Could you neatly fit them in with the categories, growth, renewal, protection? So there's all those kind of things up in the air. But really, the thing about evidence, it's so costly. So I think one message really is look at the issues that you are really trying to address in your plan, and commission evidence only really when you need to. So be very proportionate in that approach. And of course, then the resources, very small planning policy teams. And, to get, and this whole process is so, it's so intense in terms of trying to get plans through examination. And, you're dealing with, some teams, young teams and experienced teams, they haven't been through that before. So, there's considerable pressure for us to get that through. And I suppose in Brent, we are again lucky that we've got, real member support, and, there is the corporate backing, which is great. But I think it's down to the evidence, I think, and the issues that you really want to address, and maybe think a bit more kind of creatively around that. And then, of course, commissioning with your neighbouring boroughs. In West London, through West London Alliance, we do a lot of kind of joint commissioning of evidence base, which has helped us in development of our plan.
Thank you. And Killian, from your perspective, dealing with the planning inspectorate, virtual hearings, what impact do you think resources and the building up, or the need for more expertise of dealing with these particular issues that are now coming up, particularly with the white paper, but also with the COVID crisis, how do you think that's impacted or impacting on the on PINs, and from what you've seen on a practical basis?
On a practical basis, I I suspect that some virtual events are here to stay, that actually COVID-19, there was an ambition amongst some at PINS to introduce virtual events for hearings. And I think COVID-19 was seen as a mechanism to actually bring in and expedite the process of bringing in these changes. So the rumblings I'm hearing are that from some pretty credible sources of that virtual events in respect to hearings might be here to stay. In respect to inquiries, though, the experienced inspectors that I've heard from are saying that they are resistant against having virtual events for inquiries going forward. Just more simply because it's hard to control a room where you've got to do it virtually. So I imagine local planning examinations and inquiries, you know, when we return to some sense of normality, they will return to being in-person events and life will presumably return to normal with them. But I imagine that hearings will be virtual going forward, but one never knows.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question. So I'm just going to follow up about evidence for local plans, which has been referred to. So the planning white paper proposes cuts to the underpinning evidence for local plans. Do you think this will make the documents more flexible and adaptable, or do you think it will lead to the impoverishment of local plans? Who wants to go first? Anna, as you're smiling.
Impossible question for me, isn't it? I think it, again, local plans are a product of the teams and the councillors working on them and the community's involvement. I think that any system has the ability to deliver a good plan that will make things work for the area. I think there is a great danger, however, in the conversation that's happening at the moment where councils feel like they're having powers stripped away from them. And for me, it's about the perception of what they're left in control of that will be critical in this. Because in order to lead something, you have to feel that it matters and you have to feel that it will deliver something. And if there is a feeling that there is very little left for you to control in the document you're producing, there may be a tendency for it not to have the same, I suppose, impact that the previous local plans have. That is my worry, is the perception of control that in councils. Ciara, you might be able to add a bit to that, actually.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Anna. And I think, you know, reading the white paper, I was quite worried to see that a lot of that evidence base has been stripped away, and, you know, the assessment around sustainability appraisal as well, and duty to cooperate, and then issues around deliverability of plans. And, you know, I think, there's some good things that we do around infrastructure delivery in particular. You know, has been a really strong evidence base supporting plans. So I suppose it's kind of like, is the reason behind it because the government thinks that, you know, rafts of evidence base take ages and ages to produce, which then means you can't get a local plan in place. You know, I don't think you can actually put those two together, saying just because evidence takes long, that means your plan making takes up to 7 years. I think, again, as I said earlier, it is really about the issues that you want to address in your plan. And I think local authorities will have to be allowed and have that freedom, I suppose, to be able to bring forward the evidence base that they think is important to deliver the priorities of their plan. And that will be stuff obviously around your housing need and employment, the core evidence base. But I suppose there is a worry around sustainability appraisal and the bigger things around duty to cooperate and strategic planning.
Thank you. Killian, would it make your life easier or harder if the evidence base was cut?
Barristers never are in favour of making things easier because it reduces our scope to actually do our jobs. So anytime my job is getting easier, notionally my workload is potentially decreasing. So I have a conflict of interest in answering that point. Yeah, but you know, coming back to your point about will it make local plans impoverished? Well, the ambition with the white paper is, and I know you've got 3 events next month talking about planning the white paper with Planning Futures. But the ambition in respect to local plans, put briefly, is that local plans will be doing an awful lot less because they will be leaving an awful lot to national guidance to do. And a lot of that makes sense to me, because a lot of times, you know, for me, when I'm at an inquiry, I might be looking at, let's say transport is an issue. I have to look at the transport policy in the local plan, and then I have to look at the transport section of the NPPF. And I have to say, well, if they're doing different things, it's often a redundant exercise, because you would say, well, national policy should prevail. So it makes sense to strip out some aspects of local plans that are effectively just overlapping and duplicating the NPPF. So if local plans are intending to do less, it makes sense that they would require less resources to do them. But whether that actually works in practice, we'll see.
Thank you very much. And I think we're going to have to draw this session to a close. I think one of the key takeaways is watch this space, to use the space which has come up a lot in this discussion. But the reason I say that is because we've talked about monitoring plans and keeping a constant eye on the direction of our plans and what they provide for. We are in a fast-paced world, and that I mean as in our areas and places and spaces are dramatically changing, as is the planning world. And therefore the sensible approach has to be that we need to keep our eyes open and monitor our plans regularly. This draws an end to this event. I would of course like to thank all of our panelists. Thank you for a really interesting discussion. This event, as I mentioned at the beginning, will be online hopefully by the end of today. Please, for everyone watching and for our panelists, please do share it. Our next series of events, which will be taking place over the next month or so, will be online very shortly. And just a note for your diary is that we have the Housing Minister, Chris Pincher, doing an event for us in November as well. So that's a save the date. But thank you all again, and have a great day.